Hey Toy fans, Rob here. I thought we'd go ahead and take some time to talk about some recent San Diego Comic-Con news, or at least it was recent, about 3 weeks ago. But anyway, as you may have heard, we are going to be getting a Captain Marvel film in 2019, and the setting for that film is going to be the 90s, which is really strange. But we did hear that the Skrulls are going to be the antagonist. And if you're a Marvel movie fan who actually reads the comic books, you probably immediately thought of the storyline Secret Invasion. I mean, I sure did. What other Skrull story are you going to think of? I mean, of course, there's the Skrull War and that time that Galactus destroyed their planet, but given the likes of the Winter Soldier, Civil War, and Iron Man Extremis, Marvel really does seem to be pulling from more recent Marvel comics in their movie adaptations. So that creates for some interesting story possibilities for the movies. But before we get into what Secret Invasion actually is, for any of you watching, if you've never heard of the Skrulls, they're actually a shape-shifting race of aliens who first appeared in Fantastic Four #2 from January of 1962. What do? They mostly war with the Kree, that same race that Ronan the Accuser hails from Guardians of the Galaxy. But more famously, they can mimic the appearance and vocals of most humanoids. Some specialized Skrulls can even mimic superpowers. However, more recently in the comics, the Skrulls were the center of a major comic book crossover storyline called Secret Invasion, which released in 2008. The premise of this story told that at some point in comic book history, many of our beloved Marvel characters were kidnapped and replaced by Skrulls. The ultimate goal, of course, being world domination, and the Skrull queen herself, Varanki? Let's go with Varanki. Varanki had actually taken the place of Jessica Drew Spider-Woman. The Skrulls were everywhere. They were in the Avengers, The Hand. It was actually the death of the recently slain Elektra, having been revealed to be a Skrull, that put the whole Secret Invasion story arc into motion. But suffice to say, this storyline was a pretty big deal. Secret Invasion is also probably the most important storyline that the Skrulls have been a part of in the last couple of decades. And that's why we're talking about it. With the Captain Marvel movie set to take place in the 90s, roughly 20 years or so before the debut of 2008's Iron Man movie, Marvel Studios seems to have the perfect opportunity to try to sneak in a Skrull or two into the modern Marvel Cinematic Universe. Skrulls who have seemingly been hiding all of this time, and likely posing as characters that we all know and love from the current MCU films. Why do these Skrulls have to have been placed during the 90s? Well, it would make it easier for moviegoers to understand when the actual infiltration happened, and it also makes this list a bit easier to come up with. Oh right, the list. Today I'm going to be predicting who I think are actually Skrulls in the MCU. And this list would have been a lot more novel had I been able to record it a couple of weeks ago, but life happened. But before I go ahead and predict who the Skrulls might be in the MCU, just a couple quick ground rules. I'm going to assume the Skrulls that are hiding in the MCU are non-genetically modified Skrulls. No Clerk the Super Skrull, assuming Marvel can even use the character. We're looking at average Joes here. Marvel may choose to go a different route, but keeping non-powered Skrulls in play helps us narrow things down a bit more, and makes their hidden status all the more shocking when it's finally revealed. And I'm also going under the assumption that Skrull replacement took place in the 90s because movies. Also, we've got a lot of players involved, so I'm going to be avoiding Marvel Netflix or Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. I'm not a hater of those programs, in fact I seem to like them more than most people. But there's a very low chance that Marvel Netflix is ever going to have a Skrull reveal, and Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. might actually do it, but they've got a huge cast of characters on that show, both past and present, and to talk about Skrulls in that universe, you'd really just need to make your own video. And for the one or two of you excited for Inhumans this fall, I'm not going to touch on that series either, we just don't know enough about the characters. At least the MCU version of those characters. Also, people like numbers. So while I could be wrong about any of these predictions, I'm going to go ahead and give them a nifty little rating system so we can have a bit more fun. Now, if I've forgotten anything or didn't make something clear, let me know in the comments below and we can discuss later. But for now, let's get on with the predictions. Okay, let's get some easy ones out of the way. Spider-Man is 15 years old in the MCU. He's actually too young to even have been alive in the 90s, not to mention he's got superpowers, so he's out. Aunt May would be an interesting choice for a Skrull. She's old enough to have been around in the 90s, but really any character from the Spider-Man universe probably doesn't work. Mostly because of the Marvel-Sony deal, which probably means Marvel wants to avoid mucking around too much with characters they don't 100% own. And then we've got the Guardians of the Galaxy, and none of these characters were even on Earth in the 90s. There's no reason for them to be on the Skrulls' radar, plus they're likely to be done with showing up on Earth after Infinity War settles down. 0% chance they're out. Next up is Thor, Loki, and the Asgardians. Thanks to the first Thor movie, we already know what Loki and Thor were up to prior to 2008's Iron Man. They weren't even on Earth either. And it seems highly unlikely that Skrulls would have replaced them. The same holds true for all of the other notable Marvel Cinematic Universe Asgardians, plus these guys all have powers. There's also a very real possibility that Thor and Loki will be the only Asgardians to survive the events of Thor Ragnarok, so there wouldn't even potentially be any Asgardians left for the Skrulls to be hiding as post-Infinity War. The Asgardians are out. Moving along, we've got Doctor Strange, Scarlet Witch, the Vision, Doctor Strange is old enough, but he's a magic user. Scarlet Witch was maybe going to be an Inhuman, but that payoff's never coming. And she's a magic user, kind of. And the synthezoid man Vision didn't even exist in the 90s, as we saw his birth in Avengers Age of Ultron. These guys are out. Ant-Man has some impressive breaking and entering skills, but Scott Lang is really just an average guy who lucked into his superheroism. He was around in the 90s, but likely nowhere near a blip on the Skrulls' tactical radar. He's also out. In the case of the Hulk, perhaps Skrull DNA could explain how a mere puny human survived gamma radiation, but Bruce likely would have been found out when he was sending blood samples to Mr. Blue in 2008's The Incredible Hulk. Plus, the Hulk as a Skrull would just be a major disappointment. Oh, but not you, Hulkling, you're fine. 0% for the Hulk, he's out. And let's talk about the Winter Soldier. We do know the Winter Soldier was active in the 90s, specifically December 16, 1991, but during that time period, Bucky was in and out of cold storage and seemingly firmly in the grasp of the Russian military. Also, it's unlikely that if he were a Skrull, his brain would be as susceptible to programming in the same way that Bucky's human brain is. That leaves Winter Soldier with a pretty likely 0% chance. He's out. Okay, so right about now you guys are asking yourself, is anybody going to be a Skrull on this list? Well, I wanted to get the unlikely candidates out of the way first, but this is where we start to tip the needle a bit. Let's talk Captain America. Steve Rogers is the heart and soul of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. He's the hero you want to root for. He's been a pretty effective point of view character for the audience in his many appearances. Some even call him the Superman of our modern times. In short, he seems infallible. Despite the fact that he was taking an ice nap throughout the duration of the 90s in the MCU, what if it turned out he was replaced at some point after waking up? But when? Based on his appearances in the MCU, it doesn't really seem that likely that it ever could have happened. But look at how quickly and easily Loki impersonated him in Thor: The Dark World. Cap as a Skrull would honestly probably be the biggest mistake Marvel could ever make for the character. I mean, why do that when they could have just revealed him as an agent of Hydra? Oh. But especially when you consider retroactively how irrevocably tarnished all of his previous MCU appearances would suddenly become, it really wouldn't make sense to make Cap a Skrull. But maybe that's why they go for it. For fun, I'm going to go ahead and give this one a 1% chance. But please, Marvel, if there's any chance you're actually considering this, just don't. Next, we have the Falcon. While a human in a, bird costume seems like great cover for a standard Skrull soldier. Take into account the fact that Falcon just kind of shows up during the National Mall sequence in Captain America the Winter Soldier, and the fact that Falcon is young, but could have been enlistment age in the 90s, and potentially shown up on Skrull radar at that point, there is the slight possibility that he might be a Skrull. I'm not calling it a high chance, but if Steve's best friend in modern day turns out to be a Skrull, the dramatic weight and ramifications of such a reveal would greatly change the character of Captain America and his ability to trust people moving forward. If it weren't for the fact that Anthony Mackie was such a likable screen presence, and the fact that Falcon is available to take up the Captain America mantle once Chris Evans decides he wants to move on, I might place this one a bit higher. But given all of the variables, I'm going to say Falcon has a 15% chance of being a Skrull. And while we're talking about seemingly average human superheroes, let's talk Hawkeye. Now, every time a new movie comes around, the internet braces for the death of Hawkeye again. It never comes, but we're always waiting for it. He's the most picked on hero in the MCU, as far as fan commentary is concerned. Why not make him a Skrull this whole time to spite all of us? He's even old enough to have been a person of interest in the 90s version of the MCU. The only problem is his family. Hawkeye has 3 children. It'd be hard to explain how an alien fathered 3 human children and was never discovered. Unless his wife is, of course, a Skrull. But that just needlessly complicates things, so let's not go there. Unless Marvel really wants to throw us for a loop, and they could, I'm saying Hawkeye has about a 10% chance of being green. Next, let's talk about the Black Widow. Natasha is already a known spy. She even double-crossed Iron Man in her first MCU appearance in Iron Man 2. She proved to Cap how good she was at hiding in plain sight in Captain America the Winter Soldier, and then she double-crosses Tony again in Captain America Civil War. And then there was this sudden relationship with Bruce Banner in Avengers Age of Ultron. Was that just a romance of convenience, so the Skrulls could effectively have a way to subdue the Hulk in the event of an invasion? It's uncanny how perfectly her cover fits. The only thing that gets in the way of her potentially being an alien is the flashback we witnessed in Age of Ultron, courtesy of the Scarlet Witch. Why would a Skrull infiltrator have Natasha's childhood memories? A case could be made that Skrull Natasha is the ultimate sleeper agent, but for the purpose of box office appeal, I don't know that Marvel would want to make things so convoluted for their MCU. But you never know. Maybe the Black Widow's actually Skrull Queen Varanki. It'd be a great way to retire the character. It would allow Scarlett Johansson to move on, and even put a new actress in her place. Black Widow could move on as the Skrull Queen for the next several films. The possibilities are really enticing. I'm giving Black Widow a 50% chance of being a Skrull. And we haven't talked about him yet, so let's go ahead and address Iron Man. Just as a reminder, I'm making this video before we know a whole lot about the events of Avengers Infinity War. So what I'm about to say may mean nothing, or it could possibly ruin a major moment you might not see coming at the end of that movie. Fairly recently, Robert Downey Jr. made the comment that he wants to leave the MCU while he's still on top. With that info taken into consideration, as well as the journey that Tony Stark has been on since the release of Iron Man in 2008, I personally believe that if we do end up getting a Secret Invasion movie, post-Infinity War, Tony's not going to be around for it. Why? Because in an effort to make up for selling weapons, creating Ultron, lying to his own teammates, fighting his own teammates, and generally being kind of the screw-up of the MCU with the best intentions, I think Iron Man will die in a moment of heroic self-sacrifice, taking down Thanos in the process. Everyone in the MCU would get to remember Tony as the ultimate hero once the day is saved, and it would mean Downey gets to walk away from the franchise on a decade-long high note before moviegoers begin to grow tired of a film franchise and its character that's beginning to overstay its welcome. It's bold, but I'm saying chances of Tony being a Skrull, 0%. And hey, you never know. Maybe Black Widow falls during that same battle and the Avengers discover her Skrull body, mirroring the events of when Elektra was discovered in the comics. And maybe that moment is a post-credits teaser. Oh, I'm liking this idea already. But if we're talking about the biggest guns in the MCU, we have to talk about the biggest gun. Or was it the man with the biggest gun? War Machine. If you've been keeping score, this is the name you've probably noticed hasn't come up yet. Jim War Machine Rhodes is a very interesting character to consider in the context of the MCU. Rhodey is easily old enough to have been around in the 90s version of the MCU. In fact, he's old enough now to have been around Captain Marvel actor Brie Larson's same age in the 90s. Carol Danvers, aka Captain Marvel, has a history in the comics of being an Air Force test pilot. Assuming the MCU holds to that same backstory, both Danvers and Rhodey would have been young Air Force pilots at the same time, possibly even working together on the same base. Perhaps both were even test pilots on an experimental aircraft that ends up shooting Carol into space to investigate an unknown alien threat, while Rhodey gets stuck behind. Perhaps a young Nick Fury comes along to cover the whole thing up and classify the project, so Rhodey can never talk about it again. Maybe Rhodey even dies during some sort of accident that actually resulted in Carol not being able to get back home this whole time. And it's during this time that a Skrull could have ended up replacing Rhodey and no one else would be the wiser. Rhodey certainly could have been a person of interest to the Skrulls in the 90s, and based on what we know about the current state of the MCU, Rhodey went on to become best friends with famous billionaire, genius, playboy philanthropist, and most importantly, weapons developer Tony Stark, while also chumming it up with the US president. Rhodey is a character who's been around in the MCU the whole time. Plus, he's also a character we know very little about, aside from the fact that he's in the Air Force and he's War Machine. Everything here for Skrull replacement fits, except Rhodey nearly died during the events of Captain America Civil War. We even actually see in that movie as his whole body gets MRI'd during his recovery. If he was a Skrull, his alien insides would have been found out right then and there, but they weren't. Then again, it's also worth pointing out that even in a suit of armor, no mortal man should have been able to survive the fall that Rhodey took during the airport battle in Civil War. Perhaps he only survived because he's an alien. Taking all of these factors into consideration, I've got to give Rhodey a 90% likelihood of being a Skrull. And you've got to think, a reveal like this would ruin the entire team. But is it too obvious? And there you have it, true believers. Do you agree or disagree? Let me know in the comments below. But these aren't the only characters that may be Skrulls. There's also a whole host of supporting characters in the MCU whose whereabouts seems somewhat suspect. Sharon, Everett, I'm looking at you guys. But if you guys show me you like this video, perhaps we can talk about them in a follow-up in the near future and see what they're all about. Thanks for watching. I'm Rob, and I'll see you next time.